The basic historical foundation from their point of view is very simple. Jesus made Peter the first pope, and that established the church on the papacy, and ever since there's been a steady stream of apostolic succession. That's the Holy Mother Church. That's the infallible apostolic church. We find that the first time the term Catholic was used was by Irenaeus in the 2nd century. And Catholic meaning universal, right? It means universal church. Even the word church, what does that mean? Ecclesia, that means called out ones. Okay, so it's the people who have been called out of the world to serve God. That's the church. We're not just talking about a building or a authoritative religious structure with a hierarchy. That's a different issue. When you're looking at the basic term, church, that's what it means. The people are the church. When they meet in the building, the church is meeting in the building. And what we find a lot, it seems to me, in Catholicism is they will take their modern day definition of terms and then read them back into history. What I mean is they say the Catholic Church is the church established by Jesus on Peter, who is the Pope, that is infallible and has apostolic succession. And then anytime backwards in history, for instance, in the writings of the early church fathers, wherever they see the word church or Catholic Church, they say, aha, you see? Way, way, way back, we've always been the church. But that's really reading today's meaning into yesterday's terms. That might not necessarily be what they meant back then. And of course, a lot of times it wasn't. And I think during the course of this class, we'll probably run across a lot of things like that I'll point out. And so you find in the writings of the early church fathers, they say the Catholic Church so-and-so. Aha. Well, what they're really saying is the universal, the people all over the world who've been called out to serve God, so-and-so. You see? You can't always just take a term and contemporize the meaning. You have to ask historical context. What did it mean to them when they were writing that? The term Pope, likewise, it originally was used of any of the major bishops. Well, today it means something different. So when you read church history, again, the early church fathers, the Pope, this and that. He's talking about the infallible head of the whole church. Well, wait a minute. That's not what it meant back then. So you have to keep these things in mind. You see, each major city had a head bishop. Okay, so eventually, basically all these were called popes. They were just the head bishop for that city. And the term pope originally expressed the fatherly care of any and every bishop of the flock. And so let's look at a little bit of the historical development here. And we'll just hit a couple of key points, because obviously to go back through church history would require an entire course. So let's look at the year 330, where something significant happens, which is that the capital of Rome is moved. Now you have to understand, at this point, Rome is like the world power, okay? Now Constantine moves the capital of Rome to Byzantium, which then he called Constantinople, and is today called Istanbul. So you can imagine, as the Bishop of Rome, you're thinking, okay, I was the bishop of the capital of the world, and now it's gone over there, and I'm still here. See, that would cause a problem there. In 325 AD, the sixth canon of the Council of Nicaea states, "Let the ancient customs which exist in Egypt and Libya and Pentapolis remain in force, to the effect that the Bishop of Alexandria should have authority over all these, since this is customary also for the bishop who is in Rome, and similarly both as to Antioch and in the other provinces. So this gives the Bishop of Alexandria, Antioch, and Rome authority over the bishops of the great divisions of the empire. So again, you have certain head bishops who have authority over the churches in certain cities. And the main cities at this time were Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Rome. So each of these had bishops. Now, if you look at a map, you basically have Rome in the west and Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, and Jerusalem in the east. So if there was any sort of contention, doctrinal, political, or otherwise, it was likely to be in the east because there you had 4. Well, over here you had 1, right? So a lot of times the 4 churches on the east would appeal to Rome for a final decision on an issue they were dealing with. And this gave Rome, the Bishop of Rome, a certain prestige. See, they would come to the Bishop of Rome and say, look, we have this issue we're dealing with over here in the east. We're going to consult you as a sort of third party, or in this case, fifth party, unbiased, sort of an outsider coming in to give us a decision. And mind you, this wasn't strictly one-sided. Sometimes Rome would come over to the east and say, we're having this issue in Rome. Can you help us decide? But it did give Rome, the Roman bishop, a certain amount of prestige of the 4 churches in the east coming to the west and saying, help us resolve this dispute. Now, the reason that the movement of the capital of Rome was so significant is because the Bishop of Rome had always thought that his supremacy came for the very fact that Rome was the capital of the world. And now, once it was moved, he didn't have the same amount of authority or prestige that came by just the fact that he was in the capital of the world at the time. So in about 381 AD, the Bishop of Rome puts forth for the first time that, you know what, my authority does not come from political power. It doesn't come from the fact that I'm in the capital of the world. It actually comes from Scripture. And this is the first time that the Pope claims my authority, or the Bishop of Rome, my authority comes from Scripture and tradition. So, yes, Constantine moved the capital of the world to Constantinople, but that doesn't make me any less authority, because now I can rely on Scripture and tradition and say, I have the supreme authority still. Also around this time, they were dealing with Gnostic teachings, and of course the Gnostics claimed to have secret teachings from Jesus. So it was important for the church at the time to claim and to establish its roots in the apostleship, and that's why you have this idea of apostolic succession. We have the authority, and we have it because the Apostle Peter gave it to another and another and another, and we have this line of bishops. So the Gnostics, they're not right about having these secret teachings from Jesus, because we have the line of tradition all the way down. You see, that's what. Now we jump to 452 AD, where Attila the Hun is marching towards Rome. And who comes out to meet with Attila? Not the Roman emperor, not the Roman armies, but Bishop Leo, or Pope Leo. He's the one that comes out to deal with Attila. Now at this time, of course, Attila's army was dealing with disease and running low on supplies, and they're kind of in bad shape. But still, coming to attack Rome, that was a pretty big threat. And again, who comes out? not the emperor, not the armies, Leo comes out. And he has a discussion with Attila, and he basically thwarts the attack. Now, that gives Pope Leo a lot of prestige. See, what we're looking at is this sort of slowly building up and building up and building up of power by the Roman bishop. Now, you could imagine, just think about it, the emperor didn't turn away Attila, the Roman armies didn't, Pope Leo did, see? 3 years later, Genseric, the leader of the Vandals, comes to attack Rome. And again, who comes out? Not the emperor, not the armies, but Leo does. And as he's finishing his discussion with Genseric, Genseric gets on his horse, turns around to leave, and says 14 days looting. So it wasn't exactly as good as turning away Attila. They did suffer looting for 14 days, but still, okay, this army didn't wipe out Rome. Why? Because Leo went out. See, Leo went out and met. And again, you see the slow progression of being the bishop of the capital of the world, then having it move, but still being the bishop who is rooted in sacred scripture and tradition, and more so being the bishop who turned away Attila, and more so being the bishop who turned away Genseric. You see, slowly more and more and more prestige, more and more claims to have power and authority, until we jump all the way to 1302 for an example of how far this goes. Boniface VIII, Pope Boniface VIII in Unum Sanctum writes, "There is only one holy, Catholic, and Apostolic Church. We are compelled by faith to believe and hold, and we firmly believe in her and sincerely confess her, outside of whom there is neither salvation nor remission of sins. Furthermore, we declare, state, and define that it is absolutely necessary for the salvation of all human beings that they submit to the Roman Pontiff." And going ahead a couple of more centuries for another example, in 1870, in Vatican I, the Pope is declared infallible. Now, as a whole, as the College of Cardinals, right, as a body, all the bishops are considered infallible. But so is the Pope as an individual. Now, let's put it this way. The papacy has been around for 2,000 years, right? So the Pope has had 2,000 years to make infallible proclamations. So how many has the Pope made in 2,000 years? Any guesses? 2. 2,000 years, you're saying 2? 2. That's averages 1 per millennia. Any guesses? Come on, 2,000 years. Zero to 2? That's your best guesses?
The Ascension of Mary and Mary being born of the Virgin herself.
Yeah, well, there's been 3. Those 2, yes, but this one also, the Pope's own infallibility. So that's the first one in 1870, right?
That's a trick question.
Well, yeah, the other 2 were the Immaculate Conception and the Assumption of Mary, and we'll get into those next week. But what's fascinating here, and it's a bit odd to me, is who proclaimed the Pope infallible? Well, the Pope did. Well, how does he know he's infallible? Well, because since he's infallible, if he says he's infallible, then he's infallible. We're dealing with circular logic. He's infallible because he says he is, and he's right in saying that he is because he is. You see, it just goes round and round. He gives himself infallibility, and he's right because he is infallible, so he can give himself infallibility, and he's right. You see what I mean? It's sort of like circular logic. It's like, which came first? The declaration that he's infallible or his infallibility? And it seems to me that with this claim of infallibility and with the authority behind it, it seems to me that a lot of Roman Catholic doctrines are sort of figured this way. We already know what the church teaches, and we already know that the church's teachings are infallible. Now, let's look at Scripture and look for things that will help us back up what we already believe. You see? That's eisegesis. It's reading into the text what you already want the text to be telling you. Right? As opposed to exegesis, coming to the Scripture without preconceived notions and seeing, what is the Scripture telling me? This is different. This is sort of like, we already know what the church teaches. Now let's look at Scripture and pull out, maybe a chapter here, maybe a verse there, maybe a word here, and sort of add up all these little things that'll make us satisfied with, okay, we can back up what we already believe by citing these. Rock, yes, I got a question.
How did the other four bishops let the bishop of the world get away with this? I mean, why didn't they stop this?
How did the other bishops just sort of allow the Roman bishop to take over? Well, again, there's so much church history we could get into and which we're not. But why is there the Orthodox Church, right? The Greek Orthodox Church. That's exactly why. They didn't. When you look at the Great Schism, that's what happened exactly. After a time, you have this division in the church. And so now you have Roman Catholicism over here, and you have Greek Orthodox Church over here. That's exactly why.